Katie Johnson shoves her shaking hands deeper into the warmth of her jacket pockets. The cold night air caresses her cheeks, making them red and irritated. The wind seems to whisper warnings in her ear. "Hurry home," it whispers. Something seems off about her walk home tonight. Every Friday from 5 to 10, Katie babysits some children for a family friend that lives a few blocks away from her house. She comes up on Saunders Ferry Park. Most weeks she stops to catch her breath and enjoy the night air before she goes home, but tonight that doesn't seem like such a good idea. She walks briskly past it when she hears the creaking of a swing. Her heart begins to pound, for just a minute ago she was alone in the empty clearing. She hears a child laughing and she takes a breath. It's just a little kid and her parents out for a late night walk at the park, she reassures herself. Katie turns around to wave politely at the family, but is frozen in place when she finds the park to be deserted. Warm breath on the back of Katie's hands gives her more chills than the frigid night air. Her heart beats faster and she begins to jog home. Katie hears heavy footsteps behind her and immediately she begins to look for the closest shelter. She sprints into the nearest one and closes the door, pulling out her cell phone. Dialing her mom's number, she sits against the door, breathing heavily. After 2 rings, her phone cuts off. She clicks on her phone, panicking. The empty battery symbol shows on her phone and she begins to sob. She stops suddenly when she hears a heart-wrenching wail.
"What have you done with my Polly?"
A deep man's voice yells. A little boy begins to cry outside of the door. Something begins to pound on the door so fervently that the door begins to shake and the rusty hinges don't give Katie any reassurance.
"Tell me where she is!"
The voice demands.
"Give me back my Polly!"
"I don't have your Polly!"
Katie cries, backing away from the door, further into the darkness of the shelter. The pounding stops and Katie stands frozen, petrified. She feels the child's warm breath on her hand again and she begins to panic. The boy's laugh echoes through the small, dark shelter and is joined by a young girl's high-pitched giggle. Katie continues to back up, grabbing the last lit candle in the shelter. Something hard rams into her side and she cringes in pain. She looks down and sees an engraved stone tablet about a man named James Sanders, who the park is named after. After briefly scanning the tablet, Katie finds that James Sanders had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, that died at a young age. The hair on the back of Katie's neck stands straight when she reads that Sanders had a wife named Polly. Polly's remains were said to be moved from Sanders Cemetery, which had previously been located in Saunders Ferry Park, to the famous Rock Castle. Although Sanders' headstone is moved, no one knows for sure if his remains were moved along with it. The candle threw light throughout the shelter, and shadows danced in the light. Katie looked at the shadows, refusing to look at what caused them. She hears the children's footsteps coming closer, and her eyes begin to water with fear. Before the children reach her, the heavy door swings open, and a dark figure stands in the doorway. The children look away from her and run to the figure at the door. Running through the apparition, she hears the children's laughing, and they begin to chant, "Daddy's gonna get you. Daddy's gonna get you." A tear runs down Katie's cheek as the figure begins to glide forward, seemingly floating across the rocky floor.
"Mr. Saunders, please!"
Katie starts.
"Saunders?"
Shrieks the apparition.
"Sanders! Mr. Sanders, I'm so sorry!"
She sobs.
"No one ever gets it right anymore.
He spits.
Do you know where my Polly is?"
Sanders turns to look at her, anger blazing in his eyes. His eyes soften when he sees her, and he looks momentarily stunned.
What have you done?"
He yells, the fire in his eyes returning.
"Why do you look like her?"
He demands forcefully.
"What are you talking about?"
Katie stutters.
"What have you done with my Polly?"
He shrieks, flying forward. Katie closes her eyes, preparing for the worst, but instead of pain, she hears a gunshot. Her eyes fly open and she discovers Sanders on his knees, blood staining the front of his shirt. It begins to expand, turning his shirt into a dark red. Katie takes this opportunity to run out of the shelter into the darkness of the night. As she sprints toward her house, the creaking of the swings cease, and the whole park seems to become eerily quiet. Days after Katie's encounter with James Sanders, she decides to do more research on him. She discovers that she is a very distant relative of Daniel Smith, Polly's father and Sanders' neighbor. The thing that bothered her the most about that night, though, is if James Sanders is dead, how could he have been shot? And by who? Tears well in Katie's eyes as she finds that Sanders was shot on October 25th, 1836, the same day she walked home 178 years later.